Usually when we talk about evaluating a system, whether that's like a global supply chain or a data security architecture.
Or even just a massive manufacturing plant.
Yeah, exactly. There's this default expectation of just, well, absolute mathematical precision.
Oh, for sure.
Like you look at a schematic, you trace the inputs to the outputs, and you just expect this binary reality. It either works or it doesn't.
I mean, it's an incredibly comforting illusion. We all crave that visibility.
Right.
We want the organizational gears to mesh perfectly and, the operational spreadsheets to balance out to the exact penny.
Yeah, we want nonconformities to just be these glaring red lights on a dashboard.
Exactly. But the reality is the moment you step out of the boardroom and actually go into the physical environment of an audit,
A clean schematic just shatters.
it completely shatters.
Right.
You are suddenly navigating a landscape that is profoundly murky. And the core reason for that murkiness is human.
Because, management systems are built by humans, operated by humans, and crucially, evaluated by humans.
Precisely. The instant you introduce human evaluation into any framework, you're introducing infinite behavioral variables.
Right.
You're no longer just looking at the machine, you're relying entirely on the perceptual filters of the person who is examining the machine.
Which is exactly what we are dissecting today in this deep dive. So for those of you joining us, consider us your instructors for the next hour or so.
Yes, welcome.
We are going straight to the source material that maps out this murky landscape.
Yeah.
We're looking at the BS-EN ISO19011.2026 guidelines.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is, yeah. And just to ground this before we go any further, let's establish the sheer weight of this document.
Yeah.
We throw around the acronym ISO a lot, but this isn't just a casual corporate suggestion box.
Far from it. BS stands for British Standard, EN is European Norm, and ISO is the International Organization for Standardization.
Wow.
Yeah, so when a document carries all three of those designations, you are looking at a globally harmonized, legally recognized playbook.
Okay, so this is the real deal.
Absolutely. The 1911 standard specifically dictates the absolute best practices for auditing management systems across the entire planet.
That's huge.
It is. If a multinational corporation wants to ensure its internal audits are rigorous or, if a third-party certification body is training its staff, this is the text they use.
And today, our mission is to zero in explicitly on Clause 7 of this standard. Now, I know the phrase auditor competence and evaluation sounds like it belongs in, well, the driest human resources manual ever printed.
It really does sound dry.
But when you actually read the text of Clause 7, it's wild. You realize it is fundamentally a treatise on behavioral psychology, high-stakes negotiation, and team dynamics.
Yeah, the authors of the standard clearly understood that a flawed auditor will break a perfect system.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because Clause 7 is basically the blueprint for engineering the perfect evaluator, isn't it?
It really is. It takes the subjective, totally messy reality of human competence and attempts to bind it into a reproducible, standardized process.
So let's start with the foundational philosophy of that blueprint, because Clause 7.1 lays down a massive marker right out of the gate.
It does.
It states that confidence in the entire audit process, the whole reason an organization spends millions of dollars flying people around to check operations, rests entirely on the competence of the individuals involved.
It is a really stark admission of vulnerability, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can design the most sophisticated audit program imaginable. You can have brilliant scopes, really aggressive schedules, and cutting-edge data collection tools.
But if the person is lacking?
Exactly. If the human being who is actually walking onto the factory floor or, logging into the secure server, if they lack competence, the data they bring back is worthless.
Or even worse, it's misleading.
Exactly.
I want to focus on how the standard actually defines that word, though, because, competence, in standard corporate parlance, competence usually just means you have a degree or certification.
Right, you pass a test.
Yeah, you pass the test, therefore you are competent. But ISO 19011 explicitly rejects that flat definition. It says competence is demonstrated through personal behavior combined with the ability to apply knowledge and skills.
It's a totally holistic mandate. It forces organizations to acknowledge that Technical brilliance is completely neutralized by behavioral incompetence.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like if you have an auditor who understands literally every nuance of environmental law, but they are so abrasive that they cause the auditee staff to just hide information.
Then they aren't actually competent.
Exactly. That auditor is not competent. Their behavior prevented the application of their knowledge.
So here is the specific mandate in 7.1 that I think completely reframes how we should view this whole profession.
Okay, let's hear it.
The standard explicitly notes, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but it says it's not necessary for each auditor in the audit team to have the same competence.
Right.
However, the overall competence of the audit team should be sufficient to achieve the audit objectives.
Yeah, that single sentence fundamentally decentralizes this whole concept of the super auditor.
The unicorn.
Exactly, the unicorn. Historically, the industry chased these unicorns. Organizations wanted one person who knew literally everything about everything.
Which is impossible now.
It became biologically and intellectually impossible as management systems grew more complex.
It's totally the heist crew analogy. I couldn't stop thinking about this while reviewing the text.
The heist crew.
Yeah, like in a movie. You don't build a team of 5 safecrackers. If you do, you're all going to jail because no one knows how to bypass the laser grid.
I see where you're going.
Or like, no one can drive the getaway car. You need one safecracker, one hacker, one driver, and, I don't know, the charismatic grifter to talk your way past the guards.
That's hilarious, but yeah.
Individually, none of them can empty the vault. But if you aggregate the skills, the crew has the competence to pull off the job. Is that what ISO is telling us here?
I mean, it is a very cinematic way to frame it, but the structural logic is totally identical.
Okay, give me a real-world example then.
Sure. Consider a modern audit of a massive lithium-ion battery plant. The audit objectives might include verifying worker safety protocols, assessing complex chemical waste disposal, and evaluating the cybersecurity of their automated assembly lines.
Right. And no single human being holds a master's degree in occupational health, chemical engineering, and network security. It just doesn't exist.
Exactly. So the ISO standard empowers you to build the crew. You bring in an occupational health specialist who understands the safety standards.
Gotcha.
Then you bring in a chemical engineer who acts as a technical expert.
Yeah.
And note, they might not even be a formal auditor. They just provide specific technical knowledge to the team.
Oh, that makes sense.
And finally, you bring in an IT specialist. So the competence resides in the matrix of the team, which is managed by the lead auditor.
Okay, but building that matrix requires a process. You can't just guess who you need for the heist.
No, definitely not.
And Clause 7.1 actually provides this strict, continuous 4-step loop for this. Let's walk through it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Step 1 is determine the competence you actually need to achieve the audit objectives. Step 2 is establish the evaluation criteria for the people you're considering.
Right.
Step 3, select the evaluation method. And Step 4, conduct the evaluation.
It reads like a very simple sequence on paper, but the friction happens immediately at Step 1.
How so?
Well, how do you determine what you actually need? Organizations frequently fail here because they just rely on legacy job descriptions instead of looking at the specific context of the upcoming audit.
Right, they just pull a file from 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So let's test that friction. If I'm the audit program manager and I'm staring at this 4-step loop, how do I actually execute Step 1 without just defaulting to, give me someone with 5 years of experience in generic auditing?
And that takes us right into clauses 7.2.1 and 7.2.2. The standard mandates that before you even consider individuals, you have to run a contextual diagnostic on the organization you are about to audit.
So Clause 7.2.1 demands that you evaluate the size, nature, complexity, and specific risks of the auditee.
Right, because auditing a localized single-site bakery that employs 20 people requires a fundamentally different team configuration than auditing a decentralized financial institution that operates across 15 time zones.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. The standard also mentions evaluating, and I find this phrasing fascinating, the uncertainty in achieving the audit objectives.
Yes, uncertainty.
It's an open acknowledgement that audits are highly volatile environments. You might get there and find that half the management team just quit yesterday, or a key facility flooded.
And that volatility is precisely why you have to staff your team with people who are psychologically equipped to handle the unknown.
You can't just send a robot.
Exactly. You cannot send someone who rigidly depends on a static script into an environment that is characterized by high uncertainty.
Which forms this perfect bridge into Clause 7.2.2, which is all about personal behavior. I actually call this the ISO-mandated vibe check.
The vibe check, I like that.
Because the standard dictates this intense list of required behavioral attributes. An auditor must be ethical, open-minded, diplomatic, observant, perceptive, versatile, tenacious, decisive, self-reliant, open to improvement, culturally sensitive, and collaborative.
It is an exhaustive and highly specific psychological profile.
It's huge.
Yeah, and it is placed before the section on technical skills for a very deliberate reason.
Okay, but I'd argue that the standard is kind of asking for a paradox here.
How do you mean?
Well, when you actually put these traits under a microscope, they contradict each other.
Interesting.
Think about it. Being decisive and tenacious, those are predatory traits. That's a shark. That's the prosecutor who smells a lie and refuses to let the suspect off the hook.
Right, they dig in.
But the very same paragraph demands this person be diplomatic, collaborative, and culturally sensitive. That is a UN ambassador.
A totally different energy.
Exactly.
Yep.
In high-stakes corporate environments, those traits are often mutually exclusive. How does a team leader actually find someone who is simultaneously a shark and a diplomat?
Well, the contradiction is actually the point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the authors of the standard recognize that auditing is an inherently confrontational activity that has to be disguised as a collaborative exercise.
Oh, wow.
You are walking into someone's domain, you're evaluating their life's work or their daily performance, and you're frequently documenting their failures. So the tension between tenacity and diplomacy isn't a flaw in the drafting, it is the exact psychological tightrope the auditor is required to walk.
Okay, let's ground this in a scenario for you listening. Think about your own workplace. Imagine a third-party auditor is walking the floor of a large, high-pressure manufacturing facility.
A classic high-risk situation.
Right. Their objective is to evaluate safety protocols. As they walk past the primary assembly line, they spot a massive nonconformity. A heavy stamping machine is running at full speed, but the physical safety guard has been completely unbolted and tossed aside to speed up the feed rate.
Very dangerous. Okay, let's apply your behavioral extremes to this scenario. Consider an auditor who is purely tenacious and decisive, but they completely lack diplomacy.
Right. The shark.
The shark.
They see the missing guard. They immediately slam their hand on the emergency stop button, halting the entire line. They pull out their clipboard, call over the floor manager in front of 30 workers, and just aggressively interrogate them about this gross violation of safety standards.
And what is the immediate behavioral outcome of that intervention?
Total defensive shutdown. The floor manager feels humiliated. They feel attacked. The workers are staring. From that moment forward, the manager views the auditor as an enemy combatant.
Exactly.
They will answer questions with single syllables. They won't offer a shred of context. They will actively hide every other flaw in the factory. The auditor successfully identified a fact, but they destroyed the investigative relationship.
Spot on. Now run the simulation with the opposite extreme. An auditor who over-indexes on being diplomatic and collaborative, but lacks tenacity.
Okay, so the diplomat sees the missing guard. They pull out their notebook, but they really don't want to cause a scene or disrupt production.
Right. They want to be liked.
So they politely ask the manager if there might be a better time to reinstall the guard. The manager gives them some vague excuse about maintenance, promises to do it tomorrow, and changes the subject. The auditor nods, writes down a minor note, and moves on.
And the critical danger persists.
Yeah.
The auditor prioritized the social comfort of the relationship over the brutal reality of the risk. They failed the audit objective entirely.
So the ideal auditor, the psychological profile, actually demanded by 7.2.2, has to deploy these traits sequentially.
Yes, it's about timing.
They are observant enough to spot the missing guard. They are perceptive enough to read the body language of the workers and realize they removed it because leadership is pushing an impossible production quota.
And then they are culturally sensitive enough to understand the specific power dynamics on that factory floor.
Right. And then they deploy their diplomacy to pull the manager into a private office, saving face.
Exactly. But once they are in the office, the tenacity takes over.
The shark comes out.
The shark comes out politely. They decisively state that the line simply cannot run without the guard. And finally, they become collaborative, helping the manager figure out how to document the quota issue so leadership actually understands why the safety bypass was happening in the first place.
It requires immense emotional intelligence.
Huge amount.
And the standard explicitly requires organizations to evaluate these exact traits before letting someone lead an audit. It's why you cannot evaluate competence purely via a written exam. You just can't.
No, a written exam tells you nothing about how someone handles confrontation.
Which is a great pivot to ask you, the listener, to sort of reflect on your own environment. Think about the last time someone audited your department, or even just the last time you had to deliver difficult performance feedback to a colleague.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
Did you lean too heavily on the diplomatic side and soften the blow so much that literally nothing changed? Or did you go full shark and damage the working relationship? Because Clause 7.2.2 is essentially a mirror asking you if you possess the behavioral agility to do both.
It is a really rigorous standard. But, as vital as that behavioral agility is, charm and perception alone cannot evaluate the structural integrity of a complex system.
Yeah, a diplomat can de-escalate a hostile manager, but if that diplomat doesn't understand statistical sampling or database architecture, they are just a very polite tourist.
Precisely. Which brings us to the actual mechanics. Clause 7.2.3, knowledge and skills. We are moving from the behavioral foundation into the auditor's actual toolkit.
Okay, let's open the toolkit.
The standard builds this in layers, starting with 7.2.3.2, which dictates the generic knowledge and skills every single management system auditor must possess, regardless of their specific industry.
So this is like the baseline literacy of auditing.
Exactly. They must understand the core principles, procedures, and methods. They need to know how to plan an audit, how to schedule their time effectively, and how to prioritize their focus based on risk.
It also mandates that they know how to interview effectively, how to listen, and how to sample information.
Sampling is key.
Yeah, that last one is critical because you can't audit every single email or every single widget coming off a line. You have to know how to pull a statistically relevant sample that accurately represents the whole.
But the most significant evolution in the 2026 standard is actually embedded right here in this generic knowledge section.
Oh, this is the part I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, the authors explicitly mandate that auditors must possess knowledge of how to use information and communications technology. And crucially, it singles out the use of emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence-based evaluation tools.
I really want to pause and dig deep into this because this feels like a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
The standard is acknowledging that the tools of the trade are no longer just clipboards and Excel spreadsheets. But I have to push back on the practicality of this. Like, how does an auditor actually verify the output of an AI tool without being a machine learning engineer?
This is the exact friction point of modern auditing. Let's say an auditor is evaluating a global logistics company.
Okay.
The company says, hey, we don't manually check our supplier compliance anymore. We have a proprietary AI that scrapes the data of all 5,000 suppliers, analyzes their environmental and labor records, and flags any nonconformities. Our AI says we are 100% compliant.
And if the auditor just says, oh, great, the computer says you're good, they aren't auditing. They're just taking dictation from an algorithm.
Exactly. But as you noted, the auditor cannot physically read the millions of lines of code or unpack the neural network. So how do they audit it?
Yeah. How?
They audit the management of the AI. The generic skill required here is understanding the parameters, the inputs, and the governance of the technology.
Ah, okay. So they ask questions like, who trains this AI? Or what data sets was it trained on?
Yes. How frequently do human beings spot check the AI's conclusions? They look for systemic bias.
Right. Like if the AI was trained entirely on data from North American suppliers, does it accurately flag labor violations in Southeast Asia?
Precisely. If the auditee cannot produce documentation showing how they validate and govern the AI, that is a massive nonconformity.
That's a great distinction.
The auditor doesn't need to write code. They need to understand the structural vulnerabilities of automated decision-making.
You are auditing the guardrails around the technology, not the technology itself.
Exactly.
And building on that complexity, the generic knowledge section also demands an understanding of the organization's cultural context, contracting and liability, and data protection and information security.
Data protection is another area that frequently confuses people, because the auditor needs to know how to handle the auditee's sensitive information securely during the audit process, but they also need to understand the auditee's data protection landscape itself.
But again, if we look at the friction here, how does a generic auditor evaluate a data protection system without being an IT specialist? Like if I'm auditing a hospital's management system, I can't penetration test their servers.
And you aren't supposed to. Just like with the AI, you audit the management framework.
Okay, walk me through that.
The auditor asks, do you have a documented procedure for reporting a data breach? The hospital says yes. The auditor asks, Can you show me the logs from your last simulated breach exercise?
Right.
The hospital provides the logs. The auditor then asks, where is the evidence that the board of directors reviewed the results of that simulation and allocated resources to fix the vulnerabilities found?
And if the hospital says, oh, the IT guys just handled it, the board never saw it, boom, nonconformity.
Exactly.
The management system failed to escalate a critical risk to leadership. The auditor didn't need to look at a single line of firewall code to prove the system was broken.
This highlights the vital caveat written directly into the standard regarding legal terminology, actually.
Right.
Clause 7.2.3 requires an awareness of statutory and regulatory requirements. However, it explicitly states that this awareness does not imply legal expertise.
That's a vital boundary. An auditor is not a corporate lawyer.
No, they are not.
A management system audit cannot be treated as a legal compliance audit. You are there to say, do you have a mechanism in place to identify and comply with environmental laws? You are not there to say, I declare you legally compliant with the Clean Water Act.
Right, because offering legal assurance without legal qualifications exposes the auditor and the certification body to massive liability.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The competence required is understanding the framework of compliance, not the letter of the law itself.
So that covers the massive generic baseline. But then Clause 7.2.3.3 introduces discipline-specific and sector-specific competence. This is where the generalist has to become a specialist.
Yes, generic skills allow you to conduct the interview. Sector-specific skills ensure you actually understand the answers.
Give me an example.
Well, if you are auditing a medical device manufacturer, you have to know the specific technical nuances of sterilization processes, traceability requirements, and clean room protocols.
Yeah, if you don't know what a clean room particulate count is supposed to be, you won't know you're looking at a nonconformity, even if the gauge is literally flashing red in front of you.
Which is why the standard allows for the inclusion of technical experts, as we discussed earlier. If the auditor lacks that hyper-specific knowledge, they bring in someone who has it to translate the technical reality into audit findings.
But the section of the toolkit that I find most demanding is Clause 7.2.3.4. This is the generic competence of the audit team leader. The standard really elevates the lead auditor into a role that looks shockingly similar to a corporate executive.
It is a massive leap in responsibility. A standard auditor evaluates evidence against criteria. A team leader manages a complex, multi-stakeholder project fraught with risk, politics, and logistical nightmares.
The text mandates that team leaders must possess the competence to discuss strategic issues with top management. They aren't just talking to floor managers. They are sitting across a boardroom table from a CEO, evaluating whether that executive has adequately considered the strategic risks and opportunities facing the entire corporation. You have to have the intellectual gravity to hold your own in that room.
And while they're engaging in high-level strategic discourse with the C-suite, they are simultaneously responsible for the granular management of their own team.
Yeah.
The standard requires them to make effective use of resources, provide direction to auditors in training, and resolve conflicts.
Both internally and externally. Because when a team of auditors is combing through a company for 2 weeks, conflicts are inevitable. Egos clash, findings are disputed, scopes creep. The team leader is the designated diplomat to de-escalate all of it.
And perhaps the most grounded physical responsibility placed on the team leader is taking into account the health and safety of the audit team members during the audit.
I love that this is explicitly codified. You are responsible for the heist crew.
Yes, exactly.
If you are auditing a heavy industrial site, the team leader have to ensure their auditors aren't walking into a hazardous zone without the proper personal protective equipment or conducting interviews in areas with dangerous noise levels. You are managing their physical survival, not just their clipboards.
And finally, 7.2.3.5 rounds out the toolkit by requiring knowledge for auditing multiple disciplines.
Right.
This reflects the modern reality where organizations no longer have separate quality, environmental, and safety systems. They have integrated management systems. The auditor must understand the synergies.
Like how a change in the environmental recycling policy might inadvertently degrade the quality control of the final product.
Yeah.
You have to see the intersecting webs, not just the straight lines.
So if we look at the totality of this required competence, the psychological agility of a diplomat, the strategic mind of an executive, the technological literacy to audit AI governance, and the sector knowledge of an industry veteran, we arrive at an obvious problem.
No one is born with this. You don't graduate college possessing this toolkit. Which begs the question, How does an organization actually forge a human being into this ideal auditor?
This brings us to clauses 7.2.4 and 7.2.5, which detail the mechanics of achieving competence. And the standard makes a profound philosophical statement here. Classroom theory is entirely insufficient on its own.
You cannot read your way to competence. Clause 7.2.4 states that auditor competence is acquired using a specific combination of 4 distinct elements.
Let's hear them.
The first, of course, is successfully completing training programs that cover the generic knowledge we just discussed, the book learning.
The foundational vocabulary, right. But the second element is where the true forging happens. The standard requires experience in a relevant technical, managerial, or professional position involving the exercise of judgment, decision-making, problem-solving, and communication.
The phrase exercise of judgment is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It really is.
It means you can't just have spent 10 years as a passive cog in a machine, quietly filing papers or running a piece of equipment without ever having to make a hard call. You have to have felt the weight of professional responsibility.
Let's expand on why that is so critical. Imagine an auditor who went straight from an undergraduate degree to an auditing certification with 0 time spent working in actual corporate management.
Okay.
When they audit a company, they will view every nonconformity in a vacuum. They will look at a delayed safety review and see only a rule broken.
But an auditor who has spent 5 years in a managerial position, who has actually exercised judgment, understands the friction of reality.
Exactly.
They know that the safety review was delayed because a critical supplier went bankrupt, a key manager had a heart attack, and the supply chain was in chaos. They still write up the nonconformity because a rule is a rule, but their understanding of the root cause is infinitely deeper because they have lived in those trenches.
Empathy and pragmatism are forged in the fires of actual management experience.
Right.
The third required element is education or training in the specific sector discipline. And the fourth is the most crucial step of all. Actual audit experience acquired under the direction and guidance of a competent auditor in the same discipline.
This is the apprenticeship model. It feels almost medieval in the best possible way.
Yeah,
Or like a medical residency.
very much so.
The philosophy is see one, do one, teach one. You read the standard, you work in the industry to understand the pain points, you learn the specific regulations, and then you follow a master around carrying their bags, watching how they execute the vibe check in real time.
Because you cannot teach diplomacy from a slide deck. A trainee has to physically watch a senior auditor de-escalate that hostile factory manager we talked about earlier.
Oh, I have to see it happen.
They have to observe the body language, the pacing of the questions, the strategic retreats.
I see where the standard is going, but I want to look at the friction in the next clause.
Yeah.
7.2.5. This deals specifically with achieving audit team leader competence. It states that to become a leader, an auditor needs additional experience acting in the role of a leader under the supervision of another team leader. But it includes a very specific mandate.
Yeah.
This experience should be gained under the direction of a different audit team leader.
Yes. A different mentor.
Why? I mean, if I am a trainee and I have spent 2 years shadowing the greatest lead auditor in the industry, someone who is brilliant, empathetic, and highly effective, why can't that exact same mentor supervise my transition to leadership? Why does the standard force me to go find a stranger?
Because it is a brilliant structural safeguard against the cloning of bad habits and blind spots.
Oh, really?
Every leader, no matter how exceptional, operates with a specific set of biases and a distinct style. Perhaps your brilliant mentor is highly analytical and exceptional at uncovering data anomalies, but they tend to be slightly aloof during executive interviews.
And if I only ever shadow them, my brain hardwires that specific approach as the only way to conduct an audit.
Exactly. You inherit their brilliance, but you also inherit their aloofness.
That makes total sense. By forcing the trainee to shadow a different team leader, the standard breaks the cloning cycle. It exposes the developing auditor to a completely different methodology.
Right. The new mentor might be less analytical, but possesses an incredible charismatic ability to draw confessions out of reluctant auditees.
So the trainee synthesizes both. They take the analytical rigor of Mentor A and combine it with the interview agility of Mentor B, creating a broader, more robust leadership identity. It forces cross-pollination.
It ensures the evolution of the profession rather than just repeating the same patterns generation after generation.
Okay, let's take stock of where we are. We have established the behavioral traits. The auditor has the knowledge, the AI literacy, the management experience where they exercised real judgment, and they've put in the hours as an apprentice under multiple mentors. The raw material has been forged.
it has.
Now, if we are the ones running the audit program, how do we definitively prove they are ready to be unleashed on an auditee?
That brings us to the crucible. Clauses 7.3 and 7.4. Establishing evaluation criteria and selecting the appropriate evaluation methods.
The tests.
The test. This is where the subjective qualitative traits we've been discussing are forced to meet objective measurement.
So Clause 7.3 states that the criteria used to evaluate auditors must be both quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative is the easy part.
Right.
It's the hard data. How many years of work experience do you have? How many hours of training have you logged? How many audits have you participated in as a trainee? It's essentially parsing their resume.
But the standard makes it clear that the resume is not enough. The qualitative criteria must evaluate the actual demonstration of desired behavior, knowledge, and performance of skills.
Right.
Do they actually possess the diplomacy, the cultural sensitivity, and the tenacity required by Clause 7.2.2?
Which sounds incredibly difficult to measure. I mean, you can count how many audits someone has done on a spreadsheet, but how do you quantify open-mindedness?
You don't use a spreadsheet. You use the methodologies explicitly outlined in Table 2 of Clause 7.4. The standard categorizes 6 distinct methods for evaluating competence.
Let's break these down because this is the actual machinery of evaluation. Method 1 is review of records.
This is your quantitative baseline. You review their training certificates, their employment history, their logged audit hours. It establishes what they have done on paper.
But as we know, a resume is the easiest thing to polish, or frankly, to exaggerate. It tells you nothing about their execution, which leads to method 2, feedback.
This involves collecting surveys, peer reviews, and testimonials from people they have interacted with. You ask previous auditees, how did this person conduct themselves? You ask their team leaders, were they collaborative?
The friction here is that feedback is notoriously fraught with bias.
It definitely is.
If an auditor is highly tenacious and uncovers a massive failure at a company, that company might leave them terrible feedback out of spite. Or a team leader might leave glowing feedback for an auditor simply because they share a hobby. It's a useful data point, but it's volatile.
Which is why we move to method 3, interviews. The program managers sit down with the candidate. This tests their real-time communication skills, their ability to think on their feet, and their depth of knowledge.
But an interview still only proves they can talk about the work, not necessarily that they can walk the walk under pressure. Which brings us to the gold standard. Method 4, observation.
Observation involves watching the auditor perform, either in a controlled role-play scenario or, preferably, during a witnessed live audit.
You literally watch them work.
You literally watch how they conduct an interview, how they handle resistance, and how they manage their time.
It is the most revealing method, but I imagine it's also the most expensive and time-consuming. You have to pay a senior evaluator to just stand there and watch someone else work for days. Then we have method 5, testing.
This encompasses oral and written exams to verify their sector-specific knowledge, but it can also include psychometric testing. Organizations will use psychological evaluations to determine if the candidate naturally possesses those complex traits, like versatility and decisiveness.
I always find psychometric testing in corporate environments a bit controversial, but in a role this sensitive, I totally understand why they want to probe the candidate's natural behavioral tendencies.
Right.
And finally, method 6, post-audit review.
This is looking at the exhaust pipe of the audit. You review the actual reports the candidate produced. Are their nonconformity statements clear, accurate, and actionable? Did they correctly interpret the evidence?
Now here is the absolute linchpin rule of this entire evaluation section. The standard dictates, in the strongest terms, that the evaluation should be conducted using 2 or more of these methods.
2 or more, yes.
A combination is required to ensure an outcome that is objective, consistent, fair, and reliable.
Because a single method only gives you a partial, easily manipulated picture. If you rely on just one metric, you are flying blind.
Let's construct a hypothetical scenario to prove why this combination rule is vital. Let's talk about the brilliant jerk.
The brilliant jerk, okay.
Suppose you have a candidate whose quantitative record is flawless. 15 years of industry experience, a master's degree, and they passed the written knowledge test with a perfect score. If you only used review of records and testing, they look like the perfect auditor.
On paper, they are exceptional. But the standard mandates a combination, so let's pair those records with observation. You put this candidate into a live witnessed audit.
Okay, so the candidate walks into the auditee's facility, and they spot a highly complex process deviation. Their technical brilliance allows them to immediately diagnose the root cause. But because they lack the behavioral traits of diplomacy and cultural sensitivity, they present this finding to the auditee with extreme arrogance.
Oh, no.
They are dismissive, they talk over the staff, and they refuse to listen to contextual explanations.
The auditee shuts down, files a formal complaint, and the audit objectives are compromised because communication has ceased.
So here is the critical question. Does the qualitative failure during the observation method completely override the perfect quantitative record?
In the framework of ISO 19011, it absolutely does. Clause 7.1 defined competence as the ability to apply knowledge alongside personal behavior.
Right.
If their behavior prevents the application of their knowledge, if their arrogance causes the auditee to shut down, their 15 years of experience are functionally irrelevant. They fail the evaluation because they cannot achieve the audit objectives.
That dual method requirement is an incredibly powerful filter. It prevents technically brilliant but toxic individuals from contaminating the audit process. The test shows what they know. The observation shows who they are.
It is the only way to measure the whole human. And once you have deployed these multiple methods and gathered the data, you arrive at the final stage of the process.
Section 6 of our deep dive today, making the grade and staying sharp. This covers clauses 7.5 and 7.6. We have the evaluation results in hand. Now we have to make the call.
Clause 7.5 is conducting the auditor evaluation. You take the information collected from your interviews, observations, and record reviews, and you measure it against the criteria you established back in Step 2. And the standard is ruthless here.
Very.
If the candidate does not fulfill the criteria, there is no compromise.
There are no participation trophies in ISO 19011. The text states they must undertake additional training, work, or audit experience, and a subsequent reevaluation must be performed.
The integrity of the entire global certification apparatus relies on organizations actually enforcing this. If you let an incompetent auditor pass because you are short-staffed, the resulting audits will be flawed, the nonconformities will be missed, and eventually the system they were auditing will fail, sometimes catastrophically.
But let's assume our candidate is the real deal. They nailed the observation role play, their post-audit reports were clear, and their feedback was stellar. They pass, they get the badge and the title. They are officially a competent auditor. Is the journey over?
Passing the evaluation is merely the starting line. Clause 7.6 deals entirely with maintaining and improving auditor competence. It legally mandates continual professional development, or CPD.
Because the world doesn't freeze in place the moment you pass a test.
This addresses the critical concept of the half-life of knowledge. We discussed how the 2026 standard explicitly requires an understanding of artificial intelligence tools and data protection laws. Think about an auditor who went through a rigorous evaluation and was deemed perfectly competent in the year 2020.
Oh, wow. In 2020, generative AI wasn't even a whisper in mainstream corporate supply chains.
No, not at all.
The data privacy landscape, the remote work cybersecurity protocols, the geopolitical supply chain risks, they were entirely different.
Precisely. If that 2020 auditor has rested on their laurels and not engaged in continual professional development, their technical knowledge is completely obsolete by 2026.
Wow.
They might still have the diplomatic behavior, but their toolkit is empty. They are no longer competent to audit a modern integrated management system.
Which is why Clause 7.6 states that auditors must maintain their competence through regular audit participation, personal study, coaching, attending seminars, and explicitly adapting to changes in technology, standards, and stakeholder needs. You have to constantly reforge yourself.
But the standard also places a shared burden here. It says that the individuals managing the audit program should establish suitable mechanisms for the continual evaluation and development of their auditors.
It's a two-way street. The organization cannot simply demand that the auditor stay current while refusing to pay for their training or refusing to give them the time to attend seminars. The organization has to provide the infrastructure for the patching to occur.
That is a perfect analogy. You wouldn't expect a server to maintain its own security patches. The IT department pushes the updates. An audit program must push developmental updates to its human evaluators.
I want to pause here and connect this directly to you, the listener, regardless of whether you are a formal auditor, a department manager, or just a technical specialist.
It applies to everyone.
Look at your own career trajectory right now. Are you relying on a degree or a certification you acquired 5 years ago to justify your current competence? Or are you actively patching your own knowledge base in response to industry shifts? Because the fundamental truth embedded in this standard is that past competence guarantees absolutely nothing about your future capability.
It requires a deeply humbling mindset. The precise moment a professional believes they have mastered their domain and have nothing left to learn is the exact moment their competence begins its terminal decline.
Okay, let's take a breath and retrace the incredible architecture we just unpacked within Clause 7.
We covered a lot.
We started by dismantling the myth of the solitary super auditor, realizing that modern competence is a team sport, a carefully constructed heist crew where diverse skills are aggregated to meet impossibly complex objectives.
We examined the intense psychological vibe check, detailing the agonizing tightrope an auditor must walk between the aggressive tenacity of a prosecutor and the empathetic tact of a diplomat.
We opened the massive required toolkit, moving beyond basic interviewing skills to confront the reality of auditing the governance of artificial intelligence and data networks, and the incredible executive burden placed on team leaders to manage both strategy and physical safety.
We explored the forge of competence, understanding that classroom theory is meaningless until it is tempered by the real-world exercise of judgment and the cross-pollination of an apprenticeship model.
We analyzed the absolute necessity of the dual method evaluation, using testing to prove what a candidate knows and observation to prove who they are, ensuring brilliant jerks don't compromise the process. And finally, we arrived at the relentless, unending commitment to continual professional development.
It is a remarkable, psychologically profound framework for human development, quietly disguised as a corporate auditing guideline.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. We've spent this hour dissecting how rigorously we evaluate the technical and behavioral traits of human auditors. But as the world accelerates, as management systems become entirely digitized, and as the standard itself points toward AI-based evaluation tools taking on more of the analytical heavy lifting,
We are approaching a crossroads.
a huge technological inflection point. If an AI can eventually review 1 million records in a second, spot the data anomalies, and draft the nonconformity report flawlessly, the technical skills of a human auditor become commoditized.
That's a scary thought.
Right. So the question is, will there come a day when the qualitative traits, the diplomacy, the cultural sensitivity, the raw, messy human element of looking a defensive floor manager in the eye and understanding their hidden context, are the only things keeping human auditors relevant?
Wow.
Think about that as you look at your own skill set and how you are future-proofing your own career. Will the AI take the clipboard, leaving you with only your empathy to offer?
The machinery of evaluation will undoubtedly automate. But the reality being evaluated, the fears, the pressures, the compromises of the people operating the system will always require a human touch to truly decipher.
Because, as we established at the very beginning, the inputs and outputs might look clean on a schematic, but the reality of a management system is profoundly, inescapably human. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the blueprint of competence. Keep learning, keep patching your knowledge, and we'll see you next time.